Imagine trying to invent an entirely new system of government by digging this massive semicircular stone bowl right into the side of a mountain.
Right. It sounds completely absurd when you put it that way.
It really does. I mean, you'd think a new political system starts with a manifesto or a revolution, or like at least a really long meeting behind closed doors.
Yeah, a lot of paperwork.
Exactly. But visual evidence suggests that before the ancient Greeks could fully realize the concept of democracy, they first had to invent the physical acoustic technology that made it possible to actually, hear it.
Which is just a fascinating way to look at history.
It is. And welcome to today's deep dive. If you're someone who loves to learn, you are probably constantly bombarded with these massive world-changing words. Words like democracy or science or civilization.
And so often those words just feel weightless.
Yeah, they float around like abstract glossary terms in a textbook, entirely separate from our actual physical reality.
They become conceptual ghosts, really. I mean, we know those ideas shape our modern world, but we forget that they didn't just appear out of thin air.
Right.
Ideas require a container. They need an environment, a physical architecture to sustain them. Because without the infrastructure to make them operational, philosophy is just, well, a bunch of people talking quietly to themselves.
Which brings us perfectly to our mission for today. We are taking those giant, lofty ideas and dragging them right back down to earth, grounding them in tangible, physical evidence.
And we have an incredible stack of sources in front of us today.
We really do. We're focusing entirely on ancient Greece. Specifically, we've got three very bold textual declarations. They are, quote, the cradle of democracy, the birthplace of democracy, the essence of scientific inquiry, the spirit of science, and finally, the genesis of high society, the first civilization.
Those are heavy, almost intimidating titles.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, they set an incredibly high bar. You read The Spirit of Science and you expect some kind of grand revelation.
Right, and the revelation actually comes from the visual source material that accompanies those texts. So we have this rich, complex visual collage. It's explicitly labeled Greece in stark lettering right across the center.
It's very striking.
It is, but it's the imagery that really tells the story here. It's packed with these black and white photographs of weathered ruins, classical marble statues, and then these vivid, full-color illustrations of what daily life actually looked like in those spaces.
Yeah, the contrast between the photos and the illustrations is super helpful.
Definitely. So our goal today is to unpack how these three massive concepts are perfectly physically reflected in this visual evidence. We're looking at how physical spaces actually shape human thought.
So let's start with that first declaration, the cradle of democracy. Because the collage immediately pairs that text with two very specific, very telling images.
Yes, there's this dynamic, older-looking engraving of a man in a helmet and flowing robes. He's standing on a slightly elevated stone platform, passionately speaking with his arm outstretched to this densely packed crowd.
Right.
And positioned right next to that engraving is a breathtaking photograph of a massive amphitheater. It's carved directly into the natural landscape, with row after row of tiered stone seating radiating outward from a flat central stage.
The scale of it is just staggering.
It's unbelievable.
And, when we talk about the birthplace of democracy, the conversation almost always defaults to the philosophy. We focus on the radical idea that every citizen deserves a voice.
Which is important, obviously.
Of course. But an idea alone does not govern a city-state of thousands of people. Democracy required physical, engineered infrastructure. That amphitheater in the photograph isn't just a place to watch a play.
Right, it's not just for entertainment.
Exactly. It is an architectural manifestation of political equality.
I'm looking at the sheer sweep of those stone seats, and I'm just trying to imagine the logistics of it.
Yeah.
If you want a society where everyone gets to vote, you need a space where thousands of people can actually gather simultaneously.
Yeah.
But more than that, they all need to be able to hear the person standing on that central stage. Like a modern sports mega stadium or an outdoor concert venue has massive speaker systems. But doing this without a microphone? In the open air?
It seems like an impossible physics problem.
Exactly. How did they do it?
Well, it is a massive physics problem, and they solved it with acoustic engineering. We can look at structures like the Great Theater at Epidaurus as a prime example. The Greeks didn't just carve seats into a hill randomly.
Oh, they didn't?
No, not at all. They engineered the limestone seating to act as a highly sophisticated acoustic filter. The corrugated surface of those stone steps actually filters out low-frequency background noise.
Wait, you mean like the murmur of the crowd? Or the wind rustling the trees? The stone itself muffled that?
Precisely, the ridges in the limestone act as a natural acoustic trap for low frequencies. And at the same time, it amplifies the high-frequency sounds coming from the stage, like the human voice.
Oh, wow. That is brilliant.
It is. A speaker could stand at the center, speak at a completely normal volume, and be heard with perfect clarity by 14,000 people sitting all the way up to the highest tier.
That's mind-blowing.
That geometry physically enabled the system of government to exist. It stripped away the hierarchy of the royal court, where, only a few wealthy advisors could whisper in a king's ear.
Oh, I see.
Here, the acoustic design meant the farmer in the 50th row had the exact same access to information as the wealthy merchant in the front row.
So the architecture literally forces the equality.
Yeah.
But this actually raises an important question, and I want to push on this dynamic a bit.
Sure, go ahead.
Did the physical design of these spaces force the invention of the political system? Like, did early Greeks build a big stone bowl, realize they could all hear each other perfectly, and suddenly think, hey, maybe we should all govern together?
Right.
Or did a pre-existing burning desire for political equality demand that they figure out how to build these massive acoustic filters?
That is the ultimate chicken and egg question of urban planning. It functions as a feedback loop, but the physical environment undeniably acts as the initial catalyst.
How so?
Well, look at the natural geography of Greece. It is incredibly rocky, defined by steep hills and natural valleys, and these valleys naturally form acoustic bowls.
Oh, so they already had the rough shapes in nature.
Exactly. When early communities gathered in those natural depressions, the physical reality that a large group could converse as a single, unified body nurtured the radical idea of collective self-rule. The environment gave them permission to think differently.
I love that. They experienced the phenomenon naturally and then decided to mathematically perfect it by carving those pristine limestone benches.
Yes, the desire for a more perfect equality drove them to refine the engineering. But the natural physical space made the realization of the idea possible in the first place.
Because you simply cannot have a functional participatory democracy if half the voting body can't hear the terms of the debate.
Exactly. The hardware runs the software.
The hardware runs the software. I love that phrasing. But this intense obsession with how humans interact within a physical space didn't stop at political gatherings.
No, it permeated everything.
Right. Once you realize you can engineer a mountain to filter sound frequencies and build a government, you aren't going to just stop there. They turned that same intense structural rigor toward the physical world around them.
Which brings us to the second textual source in our stack.
Yes, the essence of scientific inquiry, the spirit of science.
The visual evidence in the collage for this section is just phenomenal.
It is, but I have to admit it also feels incredibly counterintuitive to a modern observer.
Really? How do you mean?
Well, looking at the images, we have these brilliant black and white photographs of what we would strictly call art and architecture. There's a grand ruined temple, which looks like the Parthenon sitting atop a rocky hill.
Right, it's columns silhouetted against the sky.
Exactly. And there are the caryatids, which are these 6 pillars brilliantly sculpted as standing women, effortlessly bearing the colossal weight of a stone roof on their heads.
Yes, beautiful structures.
And then there's a stark photo of a famous marble statue. A muscular athlete bending forward, twisting his body, perfectly balanced right before he throws a discus.
The discobolist, yes.
Right. But when a modern listener hears the phrase, the spirit of science, our minds immediately default to sterile laboratories, microscopes, lines of data on a computer screen.
That's true. We tend to view science as the extraction of raw, unfeeling data from the natural world.
Exactly. I'm looking at this discus thrower, the discobolus, and honestly, my modern brain just sees a beautiful piece of fine art. We separate these disciplines so strictly today.
We really do.
If you go to any university, the science and engineering buildings are on one side of the campus, and the fine art studios are like a mile away. If the ancient Greeks were so obsessed with science, why are they spending years intricately carving a naked guy throwing a plate instead of building machines or writing treatises on physics?
Because to the Greek mind, carving that statue was writing a treatise on physics.
Wait, really?
Yes. That modern separation of disciplines you just described would have utterly baffled them. For the Greeks, perfect mathematics, rigorous anatomical observation, and scientific truth inherently resulted in perfect artistic beauty.
Oh, wow. So they weren't separate fields at all?
Not at all. They were not parallel tracks. They were the exact same discipline.
So you're saying this statue isn't just an aesthetic pursuit. It's not just trying to look pretty.
No, it is an anatomical and biomechanical study frozen in stone. Think about the physical demands of sculpting the Discobolus. The sculptor wasn't just trying to make a nice decoration.
What were they doing then?
They had to deeply understand the exact tension of human ligaments, the contraction of the calf muscle, and the skeletal alignment required to throw a heavy object.
I guess I never thought about how much biology you'd need to know to carve that accurately.
It's an immense amount.
Yeah.
And more than that, they were solving a massive physics problem with the medium itself. Marble has immense compressive strength, but very poor tensile strength.
Meaning it can hold a lot of weight on top of it, but it snaps easily if it's stretched or unbalanced.
Exactly. It snaps easily under its own weight if it isn't balanced perfectly.
So if the center of gravity in that twisted dynamic pose is off by like a fraction of an inch, the ankles of the statue just shatter.
Precisely. The artist had to calculate the center of mass with absolute scientific precision to ensure the statue could stand freely. It is a brilliant scientific diagram of human biology and gravity. It just happens to be rendered in three-dimensional marble.
That is fascinating, and it completely changes how I view the caryatids, too. Those 6 women holding up the temple roof.
Oh, yes.
I always look at them and thought, oh, what a creative way to decorate a column. But this was an engineering triumph.
It really was.
They had to calculate exactly how much tonnage of solid marble roof, the narrowest part of the sculpture like the human neck of the carved woman, could actually bear without structurally failing.
Exactly. They had to manage load distributions and compressive stress without compromising the anatomical realism of the figures. And if you look closely at the caryatids, you'll notice the sculptors added intricate, thick braids of hair falling down the backs of the women's necks.
Oh, yeah, I see that. I just assumed that was an ancient fashion choice.
Most people do. But that isn't just a stylistic choice. That extra marble subtly adds essential structural thickness to the weakest point of the column.
No way, really?
Yes, it prevents the neck from collapsing under the weight of the roof. It is brilliant engineering disguised as aesthetic detail.
Tricking the eye while solving the math. I love that. And they did that on a massive scale too, right?
Yeah.
And they did that on a massive scale too, right? You mentioned earlier that the Grand Temple and the Collage, the Parthenon, looks like a simple grid of columns, but it's actually packed with optical illusions.
Oh, the Parthenon is perhaps the ultimate manifestation of the Greek spirit of science. They understood that the human eye is biologically flawed.
Flawed how?
Well, when we look at massive, perfectly straight parallel lines, our brains distort them. Perfectly straight columns appear to sag in the middle, and a perfectly flat floor appears to bow downward under the weight of the building.
Right. It's just an optical trick our brains play on us. So
Yeah.
if you build a mathematically perfect box, biology actually makes it look ugly and unstable.
And the Greeks could not tolerate that, so they studied the biology of human vision, calculated the exact degree of optical distortion, and then engineered the entire temple to counteract it.
That's incredible. What's that called again?
This concept is called entasis. Every single column in the Parthenon leans slightly inward. If you were to extend the lines of the columns up into the sky, they would eventually meet to form a pyramid.
Wait, they aren't straight up and down.
No, they lean. Furthermore, the columns bulge slightly in the middle, and the entire base of the temple, the stylobate, is subtly domed like a convex lens.
That is insane. They essentially built a giant funhouse mirror out of tens of thousands of tons of stone. They engineered a mathematically warped building so that when filtered through the flawed lens of the human eye, it would appear absolutely perfect and straight.
That is the spirit of science manifested in stone. It was a completely holistic worldview. Objective truth, mathematical precision, and aesthetic beauty were entirely synonymous. You couldn't have one without the others.
That is just staggering to think about. So let's look at what we've built so far. We have a society that engineers miraculous acoustic spaces out of mountainsides to guarantee absolute political equality.
Right.
And we have a society that rigorously calculates optical illusions, tensile strength, and human biomechanics to achieve perfect physical truth. When you combine those two things, when you put those people together in an urban environment, you inevitably create the atmosphere described in our final text snippet.
The genesis of high society, the first civilization.
Exactly. And this is where the visual collage undergoes a really radical shift in tone.
It really does. It's a completely different vibe.
Up until this point in the source material, we've been looking at black and white photography. Stark, silent, empty ruins. But the bottom half of this collage is entirely different.
It comes alive.
It does. It is filled with these vivid, highly saturated, full-color illustrations showing what these spaces look like when they were actually occupied. There's an illustration of men in bright, flowing robes gathered around small fire pits as dusk settles.
Yeah, and another scene shows dozens of people animatedly debating on grand stone steps lined with these tall, green cypress trees.
And then there's this sweeping, epic vista looking out over a bustling city complex. You see majestic temples perched on high hills under a brilliant orange sunset. And down on the plazas below, hundreds of tiny figures are walking, trading, and interacting.
Now, I want to clarify something critical about the phrase used in the text here, high society.
Okay, what's that?
Because in our modern lexicon, high society carries a very specific and usually negative connotation.
Oh, sure. We hear high society, and we picture, like, extreme exclusivity. Red carpets, velvet ropes, country clubs. A social structure specifically designed to keep the majority of people out.
Right, but the visual evidence in these illustrations points to a mechanism that is the exact opposite of exclusivity.
Interesting. How so?
High society, in this historical context, refers to a highly developed, complex, and incredibly vibrant societal framework. It means a civilization that had completely conquered basic survival.
They weren't just struggling to find food anymore.
Exactly. They generated the agricultural surplus and built the grand public infrastructure necessary to allow thousands of citizens to debate philosophy, worship communally, and socialize on a monumental daily scale.
Looking at these vibrant illustrations, I definitely don't see a sterile, quiet museum. I'll throw out an analogy here, actually.
Let's hear it.
The way these public spaces are depicted, these vast plazas, the agoras, the long colonnades, they don't look like an ancient royal court. Honestly, they remind me of a bustling modern college campus on a sunny spring day, or even better, a massive particle accelerator.
A particle accelerator. Unpack that for me.
Think about what a particle accelerator actually does. It's a massive, highly engineered physical structure designed for one specific purpose: to force different elements to collide with each other at extremely high speeds to see what new energy is generated.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Right. That is what the Greek agora was. It was an architectural container designed to force high-speed collisions between, say, a merchant, a philosopher, a politician, and an artist. The physical design of the city, the open plazas and the stoas, which were these long covered walkways, literally forced people out of their private homes and into shared public friction.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. You could not be a functioning part of this first civilization in isolation.
You had to be in the mix.
You had to be. The stows you mentioned functioned precisely like the containment tubes of your accelerator. They provided shade from the harsh Mediterranean sun and shelter from the rain. This ensured that regardless of the weather, the people were physically drawn into a shared space.
So civilization wasn't just like a status they achieved and wrote down on a piece of paper.
No, it was an active, daily practice of collision and debate.
And that daily practice required the hardware we spent the first half of this deep dive discussing. You can't have the high-level philosophical debate without the acoustic steps to sit on and the engineered public square to house it.
Exactly. The physical environment didn't just host the civilization, it actively generated it.
Let's bring all of this together. At the beginning of this deep dive, we talked about how massive concepts like democracy, science, and civilization can feel like weightless abstractions.
They feel like ideas just floating in the ether.
But by closely examining this visual evidence, the limestone acoustic filters of the amphitheaters, the mathematically warped columns of the Parthenon, the biomechanical mastery of the marble statues, and the bustling collision-forcing architecture of the public squares, we see something entirely different.
These were not just lofty philosophical ideas.
No, they were tangible, heavy realities built right into the very stones of Greece.
They engineered their ideals into their environment. They didn't just write a treatise on equality. They built a stage that forced it into existence. They didn't just ponder the physics of the human body. They calculated its exact center of mass and froze it in marble.
And I think the major takeaway here, the reason this matters for you as you navigate the modern world, is that it proves a fundamental rule about understanding history and, by extension, our own society today.
Which is?
If you really want to understand the ideas of a culture, you cannot just read their texts. You have to look at the physical world they built to house those ideas. The architecture never lies about what a society truly values.
That's a great point. The physical spaces we construct are the ultimate, undeniable reflection of our priorities. If a society values commerce above all else, it builds soaring skyscrapers for banks. If it values collective governance, it builds grand public squares.
Which leaves me with a final provocative thought that I want you to mull over long after we wrap up today.
Lay it on us.
We have spent this entire deep dive looking at how the first civilization and the cradle of democracy relied entirely on physical proximity. The visual emphasis in every single image in our source material, from the amphitheater to the vivid illustrations of the agora, is on open-air gatherings.
Right, the system demanded that people be physically together.
They had to share the same acoustic space, experience the same physical friction, and look each other directly in the eye.
The infrastructure of their ideas was built entirely on the foundation of physical presence.
So if the very foundation of democracy in high society required us to be physically together in the open air, what happens to those foundational concepts today?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is, because our modern society is moving almost entirely indoors. We're working remotely from home offices, buying our groceries through an app, and debating our politics not in a shared stone amphitheater, but on isolated, glowing digital screens.
It really forces us to ask if a digital space can actually replicate the acoustic bowl. Can a social media feed replace the physical friction of the agora?
Or does shifting our entire civilization onto isolated digital platforms fundamentally change the infrastructure of our ideas? It makes you wonder if those heavy, world-changing words, democracy, science, civilization, might be starting to lose their gravity once again.
If we tear down the physical architecture that forces us to collide, maybe those ideas are floating back up into the abstract, just desperately looking for a new container.
Exactly. We hope you enjoyed today's deep dive. The next time you hear a massive, weightless word like democracy, take a moment to look around at the walls, the streets, and the screens surrounding you, and ask yourself, what kind of space is this idea living in today?